Welcome to On the Middle East, the podcast of the award-winning media service Al Monitor, where each week we talk with the decision makers and thought leaders who are making the news and shaping the trends in the Middle East. I'm Andrew Parasoliti, president of Al Monitor, and our guest this week is Mark Fitzpatrick, associate fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, a former deputy assistant secretary of state for non-proliferation, and one of the top experts on Iran and its nuclear program. Mark and I will be talking about the Iran nuclear deal, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and whether negotiators may be close to an agreement, and if so, what it means for the United States, Iran, and the region. My conversation with Mark Fitzpatrick about Iran and the latest on the Iran nuclear deal begins now. Mark, welcome back to On the Middle East.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew. Happy to be here.
Let's start with the news. Iran has submitted its response to the EU final paper based on negotiations in Vienna last week. And the final sticking point, or stickiest sticking point, seems to be the IAEA investigation into previous nuclear activities in a number of Iran nuclear sites. Mark, briefly walk us through how we got where we are and run down where you think the deal may be stuck or unstuck with regard to the investigation into Iran's previous nuclear activities.
Yeah, Andrew, that's a good way of framing it, because actually this issue of the IAEA investigation goes to the heart of the matter, the heart of why this Iran nuclear program has become such an issue. And it's because Iran had been conducting nuclear weapons related development work back earlier in this century, in 2004 and thereabouts. And some residue from that activity has been recently discovered by the IAEA, some uranium particles. When you discover uranium particles that were never reported before, it's an indication of some nuclear work that was never reported, and that would have been a violation of Iran's safeguards agreement. So the IAEA has an imperative to get to the bottom of this. That's their mission. And Iran's answers to the IAEA these past 3 years have been evasive, inconclusive, and in the IAEA's words, not credible. So Iran doesn't want to provide credible answers because it would point to work on nuclear weapons development, which they claim they never did, and they cite a fatwa that Iran will never have, that nuclear weapons are forbidden. But they don't want to be caught with their pants down, basically, and that's why this issue is such a sticking point for them.
But Mark, why doesn't Iran just give the answers and say, we may have done research in the past and that's behind us, and since that time we have nuclear inspections and safeguards, and we've made this commitment to proceed down a different path? Or are they hiding something with the purpose of continuing to hide?
Well, that's a good, I don't know the answer exactly to that question. I can surmise why they won't admit to past wrongdoings. And my belief has been that it's just part of the psychology of mankind, that having started a lie some years ago and having repeated that lie so many times that the lie becomes entrenched, and to admit to it now would mean the unraveling of that lie and pointing the finger at your supreme leader, and it's just not something that Iran can bring itself to do. But you pointed to another possibility, is that Iran may be continuing this weapons development work, and that's a big reason not to reveal anything. Or even if they're not continuing it, I think at the very least they want to be able to continue it in the future. Iran has a nuclear hedging strategy to be able to produce nuclear weapons if a rainy day comes and they feel that they need to do it. In the meantime, they keep this work on the shelf. They had the records. The records got purloined by Israel, but Iran probably had copies of it. and so they could pick it up and resume it at a time that they deem necessary.
Iran points to a precedent back in 2015, before the implementation of the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, as the Iran nuclear deal is known. There was also an IAEA investigation into Iran's past nuclear activities, and that was handled separately. And I think, as I understand the Iranian position, there's a parallel here. You wrote about it in your article for us last week at El Monitor, which is Iran wants to separate the case of the past activities with proceeding with renewal of the Iranian nuclear deal, just like in 2015 when they separated the past investigation with the implementation of the deal itself when it was launched. Explain that parallel if it works.
This parallel is eerie, in a way that just as in 2014, when the IAEA had been investigating what were very clear signs of past weapons development work, and as a condition for implementing the JCPOA, Iran required that the IAEA file be closed. And the way that was done was that the requirement in the deal that was struck in 2015 was that Iran would address the IAEA's questions, but addressing questions is not the same as satisfactorily answering them. There were 12 main questions, and by my count, Iran maybe answered them, one and a half of them satisfactorily, leaving a lot of unanswered questions. But they were, basically swept under the rug because the determination was made that it was more important to have a clear understanding of Iran's current and future activity to be able to prevent nuclear weapons related work. More important to worry about the past, the present and the future, than to worry about the past. And in any case, intelligence was very clear about Iran's past work, so they didn't need Iran to admit to it. And there's a similar situation today. Iran is pulling at different threads, newly developed threads, these threads of the uranium particles that were discovered in 2019. And Iran again wants that investigation closed before it will implement restoration of the JCPOA. Now, there's one difference between now and 2015, which I pointed out in my article for Al Monitor, is that in 2015, the issues were all about past work. And so is easier to say, okay, we'll close the file on the past work. Whereas today, the main issue for the IAEA is the whereabouts of the uranium in question, the current whereabouts of the uranium in question. And that goes to the very core of the IAEA's mission to ensure that all nuclear material in the country is for peaceful uses. So the IAEA is interested in how that nuclear material got where it was when it was discovered. That's a past issue, but they're more interested, I think, in the disposition today. And that's why these two issues are different. And I believe, my understanding is that maybe in a side deal or an understanding that if Iran comes clean about where the uranium is today, they won't necessarily have to satisfy everybody about what happened in the past. Now, Iran has not signaled that they're ready to do that, but that will be the way out for them. If they want to compromise, if they want this deal, that's a pretty generous way for them to address this.
Our two other issues have been on the table. One is the role of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which has been sanctioned by the United States. Most of what we're picking up regarding the negotiation seems to be that there's either a workaround or a resolution on that matter. And there's also the issue of guarantees. Iran feels singed feels singed because President Trump had pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 and left Iran, even though it would continue to be a signatory to the deal. uh, did not get the benefits because of U.S. secondary sanctions. So, how do you see, or do you see either of those issues continuing to be a problem, the guarantees or the IRGC matter?
Yeah, Andrew, on the face of it, it looks like both of those issues have somehow been put aside. My understanding is that the main issue that had been um, blocking a final agreement in the Vienna talks was this issue of the IAEA investigation, and that the other two issues of the terrorism designation for the IRGC and the guarantees about not pulling out again uh, somehow were dealt with. Now, the history of the negotiations with Iran might lead one to be cautious about saying it's been dealt with. Sometimes the way that Iran, or to be fair, some other countries conduct negotiations is to set something aside for a while, but then to come back to it when other issues have been addressed. So that might be what happens. But probably the way that these two issues have been seemingly dealt with that. Okay, so first of all, on the IRGC designation, Iran seems to have accepted that there's just no way that President Biden can remove IRGC from the terrorism, foreign terrorist organization designation, and that is particularly the case after the discovery of the plot against the plot to assassinate former National Security Advisor John Bolton and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and former Iran envoy Brian Hook and others. There's no way President Biden can give a whitewash to the IRGC. But I guess the way that this is being dealt with is that there's an implicit agreement or maybe an explicit agreement between Iran and the United States to deal with that separately later. And then with the issue of the guarantees that that the United States will not again pull out, the way it seems to be being framed in Iran is that Iran will receive some kind of assurance that if the United States were to pull out again, that Iran would get some kind of a compensation for that. Now, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, what kind of compensation could Biden offer now that would be relevant and binding on any future president? I don't see it, but maybe there's some kind of a way that letters could be written to tell any international firms that if they do business with Iran today, if the deal is resumed, that any business they conduct would not fall under any future sanctions. That's a kind of a letter of guarantee that that could be offered to businesses, and it's a in a way a kind of a standard practice, and it's an idea that's been out there before. So if that's the resolution of the guarantees issue, I think it's an elegant resolution.
Should Iran be concerned that if there is a Republican president, that president might renege on the nuclear deal?
Oh, absolutely. Iran should be concerned about that. I mean, it's etched in stone practically. It's not just written on the wall, but it's etched in stone. Republican Party senators have made very clear their total opposition to the deal, and several of them have said they would pull out. I mean, there was a letter from Senator Tom Cotton some time ago predicting that. So I think it's pretty clear that that a future Republican president, if one is elected, would pull out of the deal, and so Iran does have some reason to want some kind of guarantees. But as I see it, more important for Iran is the immediate benefits it gets from restoration of the deal now. Benefits that it has been foregoing this past year as they've been stalling and stalling. Every month that there's not a restoration of the deal, Iran loses upwards of $4 billion in oil sales. So if they resume a deal, and for the next 2.5 years at least of the current administration, they would be getting those benefits and all the other deals that might be consummated, and the release of the 100 billion or so dollars worth of frozen Iranian revenues from past oil sales, that's all to the good. So they get immediate upfront benefits, and the future, we don't know what will happen.
Mark, how close is Iran to a nuclear weapon? What does the administration mean when it says that Iran is potentially weeks away from having the fissile material, that is, the highly enriched uranium necessary for production of a nuclear weapon? And can that be reversed if there's an agreement on the JCPOA?
Yeah, right. So nobody knows exactly how close Iran is to being able to build a nuclear weapon. What we know is what we can see in terms of the production so far of uranium enrichment, the stockpile of the enriched uranium, and the efficiency with which Iran can produce more enriched uranium. So you take those two factors together, the stockpile and the efficiency, and you can make mathematical calculations of how long it would take Iran to produce 25 kilograms of weapons grade, highly enriched uranium. That's sufficient for one nuclear weapon. And when you do that calculation, you get a couple weeks based on Iran's current status. And that's what the administration has been saying. And a couple weeks is very, it's too close for comfort. Under the JCPOA, that so-called breakout period of when Iran could produce weapons worth of fissile material was 12 months or more. Because of Iran's development and introduction of advanced centrifuges, it's not the knowledge that it has acquired about how to build and run those centrifuges. It will be impossible to re-extend the breakout period to that 12-month minimum. Now, 12 months is an arbitrary figure. It's a good benchmark, but it doesn't have a real technical basis. There's nothing magical about it. I think that probably the best that could be done today would be to get about a 6-month breakout period. Might not even be that, but 6 months would be certainly adequate for, first of all, detection of any Iranian breakout. The IEA inspectors would be able to see that pretty quickly. So detection, some time for amelioration, and then third, some means of stopping it. By some means, military means of stopping it. And you could do that within 6 months. It's very hard to do that within the current 2 weeks. And so that's why it's absolutely imperative to extend this breakout period.
What about the prospects for what's called a sneak out option with or without the JCPOA? Is there a way, if you have an Iran nuclear deal, that Iran would be able to develop a nuclear weapon outside of the purview of international inspections and safeguards?
Well, one shouldn't overpromise the ability of the IEA or intelligence agencies to completely foreclose Iran's option for sneak out. The IEA inspectors cannot go anywhere in Iran. Iran's not a defeated country, so they don't have that right. My assumption is that intelligence agencies would detect something going on, and that the IEA would then be able to learn more about it. So a sneak out is within the realm of the possibility, but that possibility is reduced to the extent that the inspection procedures and rights of the JCPOA are restored. It was the most intrusive verification monitoring regime ever negotiated, and it's not 100% perfect. Nothing is, but it's a heck of a lot better than the situation we have right now, when Iran has stopped cooperating on all of the additional verification measures in the JCPOA.
In your article for Alt Monitor, you imply that an Iran nuclear deal could be good for regional security. How do you see the region benefiting from a deal between Iran and the world powers about its nuclear program?
Yeah, to me, this is really rather obvious. I mean, if Iran is precluded from developing a nuclear weapon because of the limits on enrichment, and most importantly, because of these additional monitoring rights of the IAEA, then the region is obviously better off in terms of its security and its ability then to develop peacefully. If Iran were to develop a nuclear weapon, or to be so close to developing it that one would have to assume a worst case scenario, then you have two factors that impinge very negatively on regional security. One is that in a circumstance that Iran is seen to be proceeding to developing a nuclear weapon, I firmly believe that Israel and the United States would take action, military action, if needed, to stop it. And this military action would start off with maybe pinpoint strikes against nuclear facilities, but it could quickly escalate, and you could have another regional war, this time involving the United States and Israel. And it could be a very bloody war. That's obviously bad for regional security. The second way that regional security is negatively impacted if there's not a deal is that if there's not a deal and Iran continues to get closer and closer to being able to develop a nuclear weapon, then other countries in the region will feel that they have an imperative to keep pace with Iran. I'm talking obviously about Saudi Arabia, but there could be others, Egypt, Turkey, for example. All of Saudi Arabia has made very clear that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it will too. And I think the Saudis would say that even if Iran does not absolutely have yet a nuclear weapon, that they have to get the whereabouts, the means of being able to keep pace. So that's why I think the JCPOA is vital for regional security.
Mark, final question. Republicans are asking that the Biden administration refuse to grant a visa to Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi to participate in the UN General Assembly meetings next month. And they're citing plots to kill John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. You had mentioned this earlier. And this all comes in the context of the attack on Salman Rushdie this past week, where the assailant was inspired, it seems, by the 1989 fatwa by the late Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran. What do you think? Should the U.S., given these recent events, grant Raisi a visa when his agents have been involved in plots to kill our officials?
There's two ways of answering that question. One is the legal obligations of the United States as a host to the United Nations. As the host, the United States is obliged to allow entry to New York City for the purposes of attending UN meetings to any world representatives. And obviously, Raisi should be allowed under that legal obligation. And his travel rights could be restricted just to attending the UN and going back and forth between there and the UN mission and his hotel. Such restrictions have previously been placed on Iranian representatives. But you've noted, very important factors here of Iran having designated former U.S. officials for assassination. Iran makes no bones about this. This is not any secret. The two you mentioned, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, others who have had a target painted on their back by Iran include Brian Hook, who led the Iran team at the State Department. That's reprehensible to target citizens like that, citizens who are not even in power anymore. So there, I think, would be certainly a moral reason and a strong political reason for the United States to draw the line and say we cannot allow the representative of a country which has directed these plots against our citizens. And I think there would be a pretty strong political support in the United States for such a restriction. And it wouldn't be the first time that the United States has prevented certain world reprehensible leaders of reprehensible countries from attending the UN. But as I say, on a legal basis, they shouldn't.
Mark, I said that was the last question, but I'm going to ask you one more. Given what you know and what we've discussed today about the Iran nuclear deal and where it stands, Do you see an agreement being signed? And if so, when? And if so, are you optimistic that it could put U.S.-Iran relations, the region, and non-proliferation on a better course?
I'm glad you left off with that answer or that question, Andrew, because it points to something positive we can end this discussion on. Up until last week, I was quite negative that the negotiations in Vienna would succeed in restoring the JCPOA. Iran had been dragging its feet for so many months. A deal that had been on the table since March just didn't seem to be palatable to Iran's leaders. But they seem to have decided that it is palatable. They responded to the EU's last final text, responded yesterday. We don't know the exact response, but according to reports, it wasn't negative. They had some questions and some quibbles, but I don't. So far, what I'm hearing is that those quibbles aren't going to block a final agreement. So I think right now, if I had to bet, I would say yes, there will be an agreement to restore the JCPOA, and I think it will happen. Probably it'll happen on this weekend and destroy my weekend because I have to write about it then. But I think in the near future we will have restoration of the JCPOA.
Mark, thank you for joining us again on the Middle East to talk about Iran. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Good talking with you.
We will return after this break.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Hagedorn, and I'm the State Department correspondent at Al Monitor.
And I'm Joe Snell. I'm Al Monitor's video editor. Let's admit it, this past year has been difficult to stay on top of the news and sift through what's accurate and what's misleading. Let Al Monitor help you.
If you care about the Middle East and North Africa, you should consider listening to Al Monitor's audio series On the Middle East with Andrew Parasalidi and Amber and Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspi. You can now watch our newest video podcast, Reading the Middle East with Gilles Capel. You can subscribe to these series on your favorite podcast platforms.
And through a host of free daily and weekly newsletters, we offer a range of perspectives with the highest journalistic standards. You can subscribe to these newsletters at almonitor.com.
As an award-winning media service headquartered in Washington, D.C., Al Monitor has a network of over 160 contributors around the world.
So if you haven't done so already, be sure to visit almonitor.com, where you can find all of these newsletters and podcasts, along with first-class reporting and analysis.
Thanks to our guests today, Mark Fitzpatrick, and our production team of Beowulf Rockland and Rosabelle Hine of Two Squared Media Productions. We will be back next week, and if you haven't done so, please sign up for all 3 of our Al Monitor podcasts at your favorite podcast platform. Reading the Middle East with Gilles Capel. Gilles' guest this month is the incredible Moroccan novelist Zeneb Makour, who discusses her debut novel, La Poule et son Coumen. And On Israel with Ben Caspi, where Ben this week talks with Prime Minister Lapid's international spokesperson, Karen Hajoff. And of course, this podcast On the Middle East, where I will be here next week with another decision maker or thought leader in the region. Thank you all for listening, and please keep up with all of the news and trends in the Middle East at almonitor.com.